They say some cars aren't built to be driven, they're built to be remembered. And among the rarest gems in Ferrari's history stands a machine so bold, so ahead of its time, that it almost feels like a dream. The Ferrari 365 P Berlinetta Speciale, the legendary Tre Posti, the only Ferrari with 3 seats and a central driving position. This is not just a car, it's a glimpse into what Ferrari could have been, and still one of the most mysterious and mesmerizing prototypes ever created. When we look back at the mid-1960s, it was a turning point in the history of sports cars. Racing teams all over Europe were discovering the advantage of placing the engine behind the driver. Cars like the Ford GT40, Porsche prototypes, and Ferrari's own 365 P2 race car were rewriting the rules of performance. Mid-engine layouts gave better balance, sharper cornering, and a true racing edge. But here's the catch. Enzo Ferrari himself was famously reluctant to adopt that idea for road cars. In his mind, a proper Ferrari Grand Tour had a front-mounted V12 with long, elegant proportions. He believed his wealthy clients didn't need or couldn't handle a road-going car that behaved like a race machine. That's where Pininfarina stepped in. Sergio Pininfarina, the man behind so many Ferrari masterpieces, saw things differently. He wanted to show that a mid-engine V12 Ferrari for the street wasn't just possible, but beautiful, innovative, and utterly unforgettable. So he gave the task to one of his most talented designers, Aldo Broverone. Their mission? Create a car that was less about production numbers and more about making a statement. This wasn't meant for the masses. It was aimed at a very specific audience: elite collectors, visionaries, and connoisseurs who craved exclusivity and were drawn to the boldest expressions of Italian design. The result was the Ferrari 365 P Berlinetta Speciale, also known as the Tre Posti, literally 3 seats. And this detail alone made it unlike anything the automotive world had ever seen. Instead of the usual 2-seat cockpit, Ferrari and Pininfarina created a central driving position, with the steering wheel directly in the middle, and 2 passenger seats set slightly behind on each side. This wasn't a gimmick. It was an idea born from racing logic. The driver in the center had perfect visibility, perfect symmetry, and weight distribution unmatched by any traditional layout. Decades later, Gordon Murray would use the same concept for the legendary McLaren F1, but Ferrari had already been there in 1966. Now, let's talk about how radical this was for the time. Imagine walking into the Paris Motor Show in 1966 and seeing this pearl-white Ferrari with sleek curves, hidden headlights, and an impossibly low stance. Most Ferraris of the era still carried that long-nose, front-engine look, and here was a machine that looked like it came from another planet, smoother, purer, with a presence that felt more like a racing prototype than a road car. Underneath, it really was a racer at heart. The car was built on a tubular chassis derived from the 365 P2 competition car, stretched slightly to fit the unique cockpit. It carried the same DNA as Ferrari's endurance racers, the cars that fought at Le Mans, but wrapped in an aluminum body sculpted like fine art. And then there's the backstory that adds even more mystique. The first prototype, chassis 8971, wasn't even fully mechanical at first. It was presented as a rolling show car, a body without working components, just to make an impact on the motor show stage. Later, Ferrari and Pininfarina fitted it with the 4.4-liter Colombo V12 so it could actually drive. This tells us how much of the project was about vision and theater, not just engineering. The reaction was immediate. This wasn't just another Ferrari, it was a conversation starter. People were fascinated, confused, and captivated all at once. Even within Ferrari, the car divided opinions. Some saw it as too radical, others as the future. But outside Maranello, it stole hearts. One of those hearts belonged to Gianni Agnelli, the powerful head of Fiat and one of Italy's most influential industrialists. He was so impressed that he commissioned a second car, chassis 8815, for himself. This alone shows the impact of the design. It wasn't built to sell in dozens or hundreds, but to impress the most powerful and passionate individuals of the time. But creating it wasn't without challenges. Engineers had to figure out how to make room for 3 people inside such a compact mid-engine design. They had to manage the heat, balance the car's weight, and ensure that this futuristic cockpit didn't compromise the elegance Pininfarina demanded. On top of that, they were blending a pure racing platform with the refinement expected of a Ferrari road car, even though it was never intended for true production. What emerged was a car that wasn't chasing Lamborghini, Porsche, or Maserati directly. Instead, it was Ferrari proving a point, that they could innovate just as boldly as their rivals, perhaps even more so. The 365P Berlinetta Speciale wasn't competition, it was declaration. In short, the origins of this car represent a fascinating tug-of-war between tradition and innovation. On one side, Enzo Ferrari's caution and his devotion to front-engine GTs. On the other, Pininfarina's vision of a mid-engine future. And in the middle of that clash, this car was born. A prototype that showed what Ferrari might have looked like if the future had arrived a little sooner.
When we talk about the Ferrari 365P Berlinetta Speciale, we're not just talking about a pretty face. Beneath its sleek Pininfarina skin lies one of the most fascinating technical experiments Ferrari ever attempted. This wasn't just a design exercise, it was a fully functional machine built with Ferrari's pure racing DNA. At its heart beats the legendary Colombo V12 engine, one of Ferrari's most celebrated power plants. In this case, it was the 4.4-liter version, producing around 380 horsepower at 7,300 RPM. Think about that number for a second. 380 horses in 1966 in a car that weighed just over a ton. That's a power-to-weight ratio that rivals many modern supercars. This was no softened, detuned engine. It was derived directly from the 365 P2 race car that Ferrari had run at Le Mans. It came with dry sump lubrication, a system usually reserved for racing, ensuring oil pressure remained stable even under extreme cornering forces. Add to that the triple Weber 40 DFI carburetors delivering fuel with that raw Ferrari symphony, and you had a road-going prototype that could howl like a racer down the Mulsanne Straight. Power was sent to the rear wheels through a 5-speed manual transaxle. Again, this was technology pulled from the track, putting the gearbox at the rear, integrated with the differential, to optimize weight distribution. Combined with the mid-engine layout, it gave the 365P an almost perfect balance, a characteristic Enzo feared would be too sharp for customers, but which Pininfarina and the engineers embraced.
Now let's talk about the chassis. Ferrari didn't start from scratch. They adapted a tubular steel frame from the 365 P2. But to fit 3 seats in the cockpit and maintain proportions, they lengthened the wheelbase slightly, to about 2.6 meters. This allowed them to place the driver right in the center while still fitting the V12 and gearbox behind. It's one of the few times in Ferrari history where the chassis itself was modified specifically to support such a radical interior layout. Suspension was fully independent at all 4 corners, another carryover from racing. Unequal length wishbones, coil springs, telescopic dampers, and anti-roll bars gave it handling precision far beyond most road cars of the 1960s. Remember, at the time, many performance cars were still running live rear axles. The 365P was light years ahead. Braking was equally advanced, with 4-wheel disc brakes and servo assistance. In an era when many cars still struggled with fade-prone drum brakes, this Ferrari had stopping power worthy of its performance. Dimensionally, it was compact yet wide, measuring about 4.4 meters long, 1.19 meters tall, and 1.89 meters wide. That width, combined with the low stance, gave it a planted look, almost like a spaceship compared to its contemporaries. At just over 1,000 kilograms, it was a featherweight considering it carried a 12-cylinder engine. And then came 1965. Performance figures, though never officially tested like a production car, are estimated at 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in just over 5 seconds, and a top speed of around 245 kilometers per hour or 152 miles per hour. For perspective, those numbers put it in the same territory as the Lamborghini Miura, a car widely credited as the first true supercar. Yet here was Ferrari with something even rarer and more extreme. But let's be honest, numbers only tell part of the story. What really makes the 365P Berlinetta Speciale is how those numbers were wrapped in design. The aluminum body sculpted by Pininfarina wasn't just beautiful, it was functional. The flowing lines hid the mid-mounted V12, the glass canopy gave light to the three-seat interior, and the low, sharp nose cut through the air with grace. Details like the flush headlights, the arched rear haunches, and the roof with a fixed glass sun panel all spoke of a futuristic vision. And then we step inside. This is where the car becomes truly unforgettable. The central driving position was more than a novelty, it was an engineering puzzle. The steering column, pedal box, and gear linkage all had to be rerouted to the middle. The two passenger seats, staggered slightly behind, gave the driver total command of the cockpit. Imagine sliding behind that wheel, with perfect visibility and symmetry, your friends seated like co-pilots in a jet fighter. It was Ferrari experimenting not just with performance, but with the very philosophy of driving. The cabin itself was elegant but minimal. Thin aluminum doors, a sweeping dash, and Ferrari's classic gated shifter made it both raw and refined. It wasn't designed for comfort. Remember, one buyer actually returned the car because it lacked air conditioning. But for those who loved cars, it was theater. Every element of the 365P Berlinetta Speciale screamed prototype. From the chassis to the engine, from the brakes to the seating, this was a laboratory on wheels. It wasn't trying to compete with other brands and showrooms, it was Ferrari and Pininfarina asking a question: what if? And that's why we call it a technical masterpiece. Because even though only two were ever built, the technology, the ideas, and the boldness packed into this machine made ripples that would influence supercar design for decades. When the Ferrari 365P Berlinetta Speciale first appeared at the Paris Motor Show in 1966, the reaction was immediate. Jaws dropped, crowds gathered, and the press called it nothing less than a jewel of design. This wasn't another front-engine Ferrari GT. This was something futuristic. A low, wide, mid-engine sculpture with 3 seats and a central driving position. It didn't just look like the future of Ferrari, it looked like the future of the automobile itself. But let's be clear, this car was never meant to be a showroom model. It was a concept, a rolling statement piece. And like many concepts, it had its contradictions. On one hand, it had the heart of a race car, a 380 horsepower V12 capable of propelling it to over 150 miles per hour. On the other hand, it lacked practical details that wealthy customers expected. In fact, when one early buyer in New York got his hands on it, he actually returned the car because it didn't have air conditioning. Imagine that, one of the rarest Ferraris ever sent back over creature comforts. That's the paradox of the 365P. Breathtaking to look at, thrilling to imagine driving, but ultimately impractical as a true road car. Still, that didn't matter to collectors. This wasn't about practicality. This was about owning a piece of Ferrari's imagination. Only 2 were ever built. The first, chassis 8971, did the motor show circuit. Paris, London, Brussels, Geneva, Los Angeles. Dazzling crowds everywhere it went. The second, chassis 8815, was commissioned by Gianni Agnelli, the head of Fiat and one of Italy's most powerful men. When someone of Agnelli's stature wanted one, you knew this car had transcended its role as just an experiment. Fast forward through the decades, and the 365P Speciale became one of Ferrari's ultimate unicorns. While the 250 GTO was winning races and the Miura was redefining the supercar, the 365P was quietly sitting in private collections, whispered about like a myth. Very few people ever saw it in person, and even fewer got to sit in that central driver's seat. By the time it resurfaced in modern times, its reputation had only grown. In 2014, Gooding & Company put one up for auction at Pebble Beach. The bids climbed to an astonishing $23.5 million. Let that sink in. More than $20 million for a car that was never even a production model. And still, it didn't meet the reserve price. The owner held on, knowing that letting go of such a treasure isn't just about money, it's about history. Today, among Ferrari enthusiasts, the 365P Berlinetta Speciale Tre Posti is regarded as one of the most important prototypes the brand ever made. Not because it raced, not because it sold in high numbers, but because it dared to ask questions. Could a Ferrari road car be mid-engined? Could a cockpit be reimagined with a central driver? Could design predict the future? And the legacy is undeniable. Look at the Ferrari Dino that came after. Its curves, its proportions, its very spirit were influenced by this prototype. Look at the McLaren F1 decades later, a central driver's seat and three-person layout. It's impossible not to see the 365P as a spiritual ancestor. Even modern hypercars like the Aston Martin Valkyrie or the Gordon Murray T50 owe a debt to the boldness of this Ferrari. But what about today's market? Realistically, there is no market. With only 2 examples built, both in the hands of ultra-exclusive collectors, the chance of buying one is almost zero. And if one ever does come up for sale again, expect the bidding to start in the tens of millions. This is the kind of car that doesn't just sit in a garage. It sits in museums, concourse lawns, and in the dreams of enthusiasts. And that's what makes it so captivating. It's not a car you can aspire to own, like a 308 or a Testarossa. It's a car you aspire to see, maybe once in your life, gleaming under the California sun at Pebble Beach or on display at Villa d'Este. It's a reminder that some Ferraris were built not to fill order books, but to inspire. So what is the 365P Berlinetta Speciale today? It's a time capsule of 1960s ambition. It's a conversation with the future. It's Ferrari at its most daring. A company known for tradition suddenly breaking its own rules to imagine a world where a road-going V12 Ferrari could look and feel like a racing prototype. And for us, as enthusiasts, it's a story worth telling again and again. Because even though most of us will never sit behind that central wheel, the idea of it, the audacity, the vision, the sound of that V12 is enough to keep the passion alive. There's something almost haunting about the Ferrari 365P Berlinetta Speciale, a car that feels like it came from a future that never quite arrived. And maybe that's why we can't stop talking about it. Now it's your turn. What do you think of this 3-seater Ferrari? If you had the chance to get behind that central wheel, would you take it for a drive or keep it locked away like a priceless jewel? And tell me, what legendary car do you want me to dive into next? If this journey through Ferrari's rarest masterpiece lit up your passion for classic cars, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and of course, like and share this video with fellow enthusiasts who live and breathe vintage machines just like we do. Because here, it's not just about cars, it's about the stories, the history, and the heartbeat of automotive legends. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.